All right, today we're going to dive into one of modern history's most complex and, frankly, controversial figures, Park Chung-hee. I mean, here's a man who's seen as both the savior of a nation and a brutal tyrant. This is the story of how he literally dragged South Korea from crushing poverty to global prosperity and the staggering price that was paid to get there.
And let's just start with this quote, because it gets right to the heart of everything. We must sacrifice for the nation. For Park, this wasn't just some catchy slogan. It was his entire blueprint for building a country.
But that just begs the question, right? What exactly was this sacrifice he was talking about? And maybe more importantly, who was it that really paid the price? The answer reveals this incredibly difficult bargain made on a national scale.
To really get our heads around Park Chung-hee, you have to understand this one core concept: authoritarian modernization. It was basically the engine that drove South Korea's entire transformation.
So what is it? Well, to put it simply, it's a trade-off. You've got an all-powerful, autocratic government pushing for massive, rapid economic change. But the cost is freedom. Civil liberties, human rights, they take a back seat. It's about achieving progress through raw power, not through debate or persuasion. So let's see what that actually looked like, starting with the economic boom. First, let's look at the modernization part of the equation. This is the story of an economic explosion so dramatic it's often called the miracle on the Han River.
You know, it's almost impossible to overstate how dire things were when Park took power in '61. The country was just shattered by war. It was overwhelmingly poor, mostly agricultural, with pretty much zero industry to speak of. It was completely dependent on international aid just to keep the lights on.
And to put a number on that, get this, the average income per person back then was just $82 a year. That was less than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, we're talking about one of the poorest nations on Earth. Okay, now fast forward to 1979. The year his rule ended. That number, it had skyrocketed to over $1,500. That's more than 17 times higher. This wasn't just growth, it was a complete and total economic reinvention of a country. So how in the world did he do it? Well, after taking power in that military coup, he immediately launched these super aggressive 5-year plans. He focused everything on building industries that could export goods, and then in the 70s, he went all in on heavy industry, steel, shipbuilding, chemicals, creating the very foundation for the global giant that South Korea is today. And this right here, this brings us to the central conflict of his rule. On one side, you have these absolutely incredible accomplishments: industrialization, insane economic growth, national infrastructure. But on the other side, you have the methods: military dictatorship, repression, stripping away basic human rights. You just can't understand one side of this story without the other. So, it's time to look at the other side of that bargain. This is the authoritarian part of the model we talked about. This is the human price that was paid for that economic miracle.
First and foremost, we have to remember, his rule did not begin at the ballot box. It began with the barrel of a gun. It was a military dictatorship from day one, and that really set the stage for everything that was about to follow. So how did he hold on to that power? Well, he created the infamous KCIA, his secret police, which became this terrifying tool of political repression. He declared martial law whenever he felt like it, he banned any real political opposition, he completely silenced labor unions, and eventually he just rewrote the Constitution to make himself president for life.
And the human cost of all this was just immense. Anyone who dared to speak out, students, journalists, political rivals, they risked being arrested, tortured, or even worse. The press was muzzled, and everyday citizens lived under this constant fear of state surveillance. This was the sacrifice he demanded. And all of this brings us to the legacy he leaves behind. It's a legacy that is just so fiercely debated, because honestly, how do you weigh economic salvation against the loss of freedom? Was he the nation's architect, or was he a tyrant?
And you know what? There really is no easy answer. For his supporters, many of whom remember that crushing, hopeless poverty of the 50s, he is nothing less than the father of the modern nation. But for his critics, he's a brutal dictator whose hands are stained by the suffering of his own people. And both of these views are held with incredible passion.
And don't think for a second this is just ancient history. This exact debate, this tension between valuing economic stability versus democratic freedom, is a fault line that runs directly through South Korean society and politics right now, decades after his death. His shadow is just that long. So we're left with this final, really challenging question to wrestle with.
Can you celebrate the gleaming skyscraper of modern South Korea without acknowledging the brutal, violent methods that were used to build its foundation? Can the creation ever be truly separated from its creator? That right there is the paradox of Park Chung-hee,